Hi, my name is Helena Del Pesco, and I'm one of the instructors here at the Fermentation School. Today I'm going to offer a knife skills course that is great for any kitchen cooking, but will be a really great companion to any of the courses we offer here. Starting off, I'm going to show you two different styles of knives. This is a Japanese style nikiri knife made by a local knife maker here in Baltimore named Henry Hyde. It's really great for chopping vegetables. It's nice and thin, not too heavy. And then this is a more sort of standard European chef knife. Let's start with an onion. This is a very common ingredient in lots of ferments and, of course, in many recipes in the kitchen. I like to start by cutting off the root end and then cutting it in half before peeling. This just makes it easier to get those outer papery layers off. I'm going to show you two different cuts here. So the first one, I'm going to remove the outer layers, and oftentimes I'll remove the first layer under the more papery layer because that can be tough. I am not going to bother with making a horizontal cut. I'm just going to go straight into cutting along the natural ridges of the onion, and keeping my knuckle in contact with the knife helps know where my fingers are in relationship to the knife. It might seem counterintuitive, but this is actually the safest way to cut, and it gives me a little control over the size of my cuts. Now I'm not cutting all the way through. I'm leaving the cuts just shy of the end so that all my pieces stay attached after cutting, and I'm cutting toward the center, changing my angle as I go. Now I'm going to move the whole onion so that I can cut the dices, again, keeping the knife in contact with my knuckle, sliding along my knuckle, and keeping all the other fingers out of the way of the blade. It's a nice fine dice or medium dice, and just sliding my finger carefully along the knife in a way that won't cut me, but helps use the knife as a sort of secondary tool for scooping. And I'm using a sort of rocking motion as I cut. Rather than chopping, going up and down, I'm sort of sliding backward and forward as the knife goes up and down. This is going to make cleaner cuts, and especially with onions, that equals less tears, which is great. Using the back of the knife to clean off my hands, that's the dice. And now for this second onion cut, we're going to do julienne or sliced onions. For this cut, I am going to chop off that top end of the onion that has some dried stem basically, and then I'm going to clean my cutting board a bit, again always keeping that surface clean, and then peel off those outer tough layers, the papery layer, and one more layer that sometimes has a little bit of mold on it, sometimes is a little tough, so I'm just going to go ahead and discard that. So now I've got this nice half onion with clean ends, and I'm going to angle my knife toward the center and then sort of cut along the natural ridge lines in the onion, using my knuckle to guide me in having a lot of control over the size so I can keep the size consistent. And then I like to flip it around. It's a little bit easier than cutting all the way across, sort of flipping it, starting from the side that's touching the cutting board, and then very carefully getting that middle piece. And just want to make sure your fingers are out of the way once that becomes a little less stable, and you can see I have nice even-sized slices of onion. Now for cabbage, I've already cut a chunk off of the whole head. It's really good to pull off the tough leaves, maybe cut off some of the thicker stem part, and then have your cabbage on a flat surface as you're shredding it. This, of course, is great for sauerkraut or any kind of ferment, but also just if you're stir frying or putting the cabbage in soup. My knife's a little bit short. It doesn't go all the way through the cabbage, so I'm just kind of cutting it at these angles, which gives me slightly smaller strips. That larger chunk has become sort of tall and a little bit unstable, so I'm going to flip it so that the bigger surface is down on the cutting board. This makes a more stable cutting surface, and I can continue shredding. I am still using my knuckle here to sort of guide the knife, and make nice thin shreds. And if you want to use a bigger knife that will get you all the way through that head of cabbage, you can switch to a bigger knife. It's a little less awkward and helps you slice all the way through that bigger vegetable. For kale, I'm going to use the knife to sort of just quickly shave the leafy green parts off of the tougher stem. And then once I have done that to a few of the leaves, and I've got a sort of pile of the leafy green parts, I don't mind if there's a little bit of stem in there. I can also fold this over and cut the stem from the middle like so. And then I am going to sort of wrap this up into a bundle, cutting along some thin ribbons. And kale is somehow one of the more dangerous vegetables to cut. I have cut myself the worst when cutting kale. I like to start with a sort of lined up surface, so cutting the bundle in half and then starting to cut along that lined up surface is helpful. And just really watching where your fingers are here. Don't let your thumb creep forward and end up under the knife. Just keep it way back there behind your fingers. Use your knuckle again to gauge where the knife is. And then toward the end, just really get your fingers out of the way. And there you've got nice thin ribbons of kale. There are a lot of really fun ways to cut carrots. I don't always peel them, but for this cut, I like them peeled. The peeling gives me some facets on the surface, and then this is a barrel roll, or some people call it a quarter turn roll. So I'm cutting at a bias angle, turning the carrot a quarter turn, and then cutting into the previous cut. This gives you a lot of nice surface area and just a really pretty, unusual shape to play with. I love pickling these in my habanero brine. Really flavorful, excellent pickle. And then, of course, if we want to leave the carrot unpeeled, I might just trim off the ends, and then we can go into a classic coin or a half coin. Cutting the carrot in half, of course, gives me a little bit more stability. And what I'm actually going to do here is make some matchsticks. So instead of using my knuckle to do a sort of claw hold while I cut, I am doing what you might call a bridge. And I'm using my hand to kind of bridge over the vegetables and then have the knife under the bridge. So you can kind of switch back and forth between the claw and the bridge. The bridge is really good for when things are sort of large or need extra stability. You get a little bit more control over what you're holding. If you want something that looks a little more uniform, you can sort of cut off those rounded sides of the carrot and, you know, maybe put them aside to use in stock or something else, and then give yourself these more uniform batons that are flat on all sides. So you can see here it's just, you know, aesthetically pleasing to have something that is a little more uniform, if that's what you like. When it comes to celery, you can use the stalk and the leaves. For the leaves, you could also put them aside and use them for cooking, to make a soup stock or something like that. But they can be shredded and go into ferments as well. All right, we've got the nice clean celery. I'm going to just start by doing a bias cut. So a good way to think about this is rather than perpendicular or horizontal, you're making a sharp angled cut. And you can see there's sort of a sharp V shape made between the knife and the celery. So we're just maintaining that. And again, my knuckle helps me sort of maintain the size of the cut and just sort of moving my hands along the stalk of celery as I cut that same bias angle. We can also use the long stalk shape of the celery to create batons. So similar to the carrots, I'm going to do these ones a little thinner. I'm carefully running the knife along the length with the grain or the sort of fibers in the celery, and then I'm going to go through and actually make a dice, so I can have a nice fine diced celery. This would be great for putting in a ferment if you want, a subtle flavor of celery without biting down on a mouthful of that flavor. So that's often how I think about what kind of cuts I want when I'm doing ferments. If I want a burst of the flavor in my mouth, distinct from other flavors, I cut bigger pieces. If I want it to be a more blended flavor in the ferment, then I'm going to cut smaller pieces. Last up, we're going to cut turnips, and these techniques could be used for anything round, beets, radishes, anything with a round shape and a sort of thin skin. I'm not going to peel these. Sometimes I peel beets, sometimes I don't. It kind of depends on what condition they're in. I am going to remove the tail here. That's up to you. You can leave the tail if you like how it looks. First, I'm going to do a sort of slice. Maybe we'd call this like a watermelon slice. So I'm rocking the turnip so that my knife is essentially cutting straight up and down, and I'm moving the turnip to get the angle that I want, and that leaves me with this sort of triangular wedge shape. And the other option with a round turnip-like vegetable is more of like a half moon or a half coin. So here I'm laying the turnip down on its flat side and just cutting straight down. So they're a little bit different, kind of just up to you what is the most exciting shape for you in this case. I can also change the shape a little bit more radically. So if I want little cubes, then I can cut off the rounded sides and start with a large cube. Maybe I chop those up into smaller pieces for something else, or just snack on them. Raw turnips are delicious. But now I'm going to give myself about like a 1/4 inch slice, and then turn that on its side and slice again, and then slice a 3rd time, and I have nice little cubes. These are really great for absorbing flavor. Turnips absorb whatever spices you put in your brine really well. This would also work well for kohlrabi, which is one of my favorites for maintaining crunch but being a good substrate for all kinds of flavors. So there you have it, a couple of different cuts for a round shaped vegetable. The more you practice these skills, the easier they will become. So have fun, play around, and be safe. And of course, you can find all of the course offerings from myself and others at fermentationschool.com.